I'm 78 years old, and for the past 3 years, none of my children have spoken to me, not on my birthday, not on Christmas, not even when I was in the hospital last spring with pneumonia. The reason is simple. I told them I wasn't leaving them my money. I want to tell you this story because I think there are others out there going through something similar. Maybe you're wondering if you made a mistake. Maybe you're feeling the same quiet pain I felt. Or maybe you're thinking about making a similar decision and you're afraid. I can't tell you what's right for your situation, but I can tell you what happened to me and how I learned to live with it. My name is Robert. I live in Portland, Oregon, in a house I bought 43 years ago for $68,000. It's worth about $800,000 now, maybe more. I also have savings, investments, a retirement account. Altogether, probably around $2 million. Not wealthy by some standards, but more than comfortable. More than I ever thought I'd have growing up poor in rural Nebraska. I worked for the same company for 37 years. Started in the warehouse, ended up in management. My wife Helen worked too. She was a school librarian for 29 years. We saved carefully. We didn't take expensive vacations. We drove our cars until they died. We lived below our means because that's what people of our generation did. We wanted security. We wanted our children to have opportunities we didn't have. We had 3 kids. Michael, the oldest, is 52 now. Sarah is 49. Daniel is 45. We gave them everything we could. Good schools, college educations, help with their first cars, down payments on their houses. When they needed money, we helped. When Michael's business struggled, we loaned him $40,000. When Sarah got divorced, we paid her legal fees. When Daniel wanted to go back to school, we covered his tuition. I'm not complaining about that. We did it willingly. They're our children. That's what parents do. Helen died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It was quick, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. Those were the hardest weeks of my life. The kids came to the hospital. They were there at the funeral. They helped me sort through her things. I thought during that time that we were close, that we were a family. About 6 months after Helen died, I started noticing something. The phone calls became less frequent. The visits stopped unless I initiated them. When we did talk, the conversations felt transactional. "How are you doing, Dad?" "Fine, fine." "Okay, well, I've got to run." That was it. 10 minutes, maybe 15 if I was lucky. I told myself they were busy. Michael has his business and 2 teenagers. Sarah works full-time and has her own health issues. Daniel lives 3 states away. They have lives. That's normal. But then I started paying attention to what they talked about when we did speak. Michael would mention needing a new roof. Sarah would talk about wanting to take her kids to Europe but not being able to afford it. Daniel would complain about his mortgage payment. And there was always this subtle undercurrent, this unspoken expectation. "Don't worry, Dad's got savings. I'm not stupid." I understood what was happening. They weren't visiting their father. They were checking on their inheritance. The realization didn't come all at once. It was gradual, like watching the sun set. You don't notice it getting dark until suddenly you can't see anymore. One day I was sitting in my living room. Helen's chair was still in the corner. I couldn't bring myself to move it, and I thought, when's the last time one of my kids asked me how I'm really doing? Not, "Are you okay?" but really asked, really listened. I couldn't remember. That's when I started thinking about the money, about what it meant, about what it was doing to my relationships with my children. I need to be honest here. The decision I made wasn't purely about them. It was about me, too. I was 75 years old. I was healthy, active, and suddenly I had all this time and no one to share it with. Helen was gone. My kids were distant. My friends from work had either moved or passed away. I was lonely. And I realized, I don't want to spend the last years of my life waiting for my health to fail, waiting for my kids to visit out of obligation, waiting to die so they can have their inheritance. I started doing research. I looked into charitable organizations, causes I cared about. Helen and I had always donated small amounts here and there, but never anything significant. I learned about planned giving, about endowments, about the impact you can make if you're strategic about it. I found 3 organizations that mattered to me. The first was a scholarship fund for first-generation college students from rural areas, kids like I was. The second was a library foundation in Helen's memory. The third was a hospice care facility because they made Helen's last weeks as comfortable as they could be. I met with a lawyer. I set up my will. The house would be sold, the proceeds split between these three organizations. My savings and investments the same. I left each of my children $10,000. Not nothing, but not the windfall they were expecting. Then came the hard part, telling them. I didn't do it dramatically. I didn't call a family meeting or make an announcement. I just mentioned it during separate phone calls with each of them. Casual, matter of fact. Oh, by the way, I've been working on my estate planning. I wanted you to know that most of my assets will be going to charity. You'll each receive $10,000, but the bulk is going elsewhere. The reactions were, well, they weren't good. Michael got angry. Are you serious? After everything after all the dad, that's our inheritance. Notice he said, our inheritance, not your money, as if it already belonged to them. Sarah cried. She said she was disappointed. She said she'd been counting on that money for her kids' college funds. She made me feel guilty, like I was betraying my grandchildren. Daniel went cold, very polite, very distant. That's your choice, Dad. It's your money. But I could hear the anger underneath. I tried to explain. I told them I wanted to make a difference while I was alive. I told them I'd already helped them significantly over the years. I told them that I believed they were capable, successful people who didn't need a windfall. They didn't want to hear it. Within a month, the calls stopped completely. At first, I told myself it was temporary. They were processing, they'd come around, but weeks turned into months. My birthday passed, 76th, no calls. Thanksgiving, I ate alone. Christmas, the same. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. It hurt like hell. There were nights I sat in this house in the dark wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. Wondering if I should call them, apologize, change the will back. My children, my own children had cut me out of their lives over money. But then I'd think about what that meant. If I changed my mind, if I gave them what they wanted, they'd come back. But they'd be coming back for the money, not for me. And I'd spend whatever time I have left wondering which one they cared about. At least now I know the truth. That first year was the hardest. I'm not going to lie and say I handled it gracefully. I was angry, I was hurt, I felt betrayed. Some days I was convinced I'd done the right thing. Other days I was sure I'd destroyed my family for no good reason. But slowly, something changed. I started actually using my time and my resources in ways that mattered to me. I volunteered at the library twice a week, sorting donations and helping with the children's reading program. I met people, real people who talked to me because they wanted to, not because they were waiting for me to die. I took a trip to Ireland, something Helen and I always talked about but never did. I went alone. It was strange at first, eating dinner by myself, seeing beautiful things with no one to share them with. But it was also freeing. I bought a nice camera and took a photography class at the community college. I was terrible at it, but I enjoyed trying. The instructor was a woman in her 40s named Janet. After class, a few of us would go get coffee. They didn't know about my money or my estranged children. They just knew I was Robert, the guy who couldn't figure out aperture settings and made everyone laugh. I started giving money away while I'm alive, not just in my will. I funded a full scholarship for a kid from Nebraska who wanted to study engineering. I donated money to rebuild the children's section of the library where Helen worked. I paid for hospice training for nurses. And I got to see the impact. I got to meet the scholarship recipient, a shy girl named Maria, who cried when she found out she could afford to go to college. I got to see the new library section with Helen's name on a plaque. I got to hear from families whose loved ones received better care because of the training. That meant something. That felt real in a way that leaving money in a will never would. Don't misunderstand me. I still miss my children. I still think about them every day. I see Michael's stubbornness in my own face when I look in the mirror. I hear Sarah's laugh in my memory. I wonder what Daniel's kids look like now. They must be teenagers. Sometimes I imagine what would happen if one of them called. If the phone rang and it was Michael, just calling to say hello. Not to apologize, not to talk about money, just to talk. I don't know what I'd do. Probably I'd cry. But they haven't called, and I've learned to live with that. Here's what I want you to understand, whoever's listening to this. The decision I made wasn't about punishing my children. It wasn't about being cruel or teaching them a lesson. It was about refusing to let money be the most important thing in our relationship. Even if that meant not having a relationship at all. Would I rather have my children in my life? Of course. Every single day I'd rather have that. But not at the cost of pretending. Not at the cost of spending my final years as a walking ATM, valued for what I can provide rather than who I am. People of my generation, we were taught that providing financially is how you show love. My father never told me he loved me, but he worked 2 jobs to keep us fed. My mother never hugged me, but she made sure I had clean clothes and hot meals. That was love, the way they understood it.